President Zelensky has announced what viewers of this channel likely already knew, that North Korean forces are deployed currently in Ukraine fighting with Russia. The world's third largest army is now a combatant in this conflict. Just what does North Korea hope to get out of it, and why is this really humiliating for the West? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. The U.S. military depends on war games to test its units and new technologies on a simulated battlefield. In fact, the military has designated war game officers who run and develop the games. Lucky for us, war games can also be a way to connect and compete with players around the globe. That's why I wanted to talk about today's sponsor, Conflict of Nations. Conflict of Nations is a free online PvP strategy game set in a modern global conflict. It's a massive game where each world has dozens of players and over 100 unique units, ranging from nuclear ballistic submarines to airborne infantry. You can compete in wars that go on for weeks, and it's up to you to decide if you want to join powerful alliances, antagonize rivals, or even betray your friends. Like real war, you need to build and research the right military for your strategy. You can research and develop over 250 different technologies to give your army the edge. One thing that I think is awesome is that the game is cross-compatible on PC and mobile, so you can play the same game on the same account whether you're at home or slacking off at work. For the next 30 days, Conflict of Nations is offering a massive exclusive sign-up bonus. Click on the link in the description to download Conflict of Nations and get 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. Okay, so the overall contours of this story are frankly what we sort of saw coming, right? We saw the North Korean officers, we saw the announcement of military aid, and now Putin is using North Korean troops to fight in Ukraine. We know that North Korea had been selling arms to Russia. Particularly, they are the primary source of Russian artillery shells. And while the shells need to be refurbished a little bit, it's vastly cheaper than would otherwise be necessary for Russia to purchase them raw materials for artillery shells on the open market. So, and we're talking about millions of artillery shells. North Korea has stockpiled its arsenal in preparation for the Korean War to resume. So from 1950 to today, they've been stockpiling Soviet-compatible artillery shells. And man, that is just a treasure trove for someone like Putin. Now, we know North Korea, you guys might recall, has also experienced a bizarre resurgence in its rocket technology. It can field rockets larger, more powerful, and more accurate than anything that it had developed up until this point. Given that we know that North Korea has nuclear weapons, right, it just needs a reliable delivery vehicle. And it seems like part of their agreement was that Russia would provide technical expertise. That's my thesis as to how suddenly North Korean rocket tech is going through the roof. So, right, it makes sense then that there's more to this agreement. Now that the besties, Putin and Kim Jong-un, have realized that they have a real collaboration on their hands, it makes sense that Kim Jong-un is going to help Russia solve its next most pressing problem, which is its increasing shortage of military manpower. We know that Russia, for example, has a incredibly high prevailing wage right now because so many men are unable to work, either because they are dead, because they have been wounded in Ukraine, or because they are currently fighting in Ukraine. That means, of course, that to draw in the next generation of recruits, they're going to be older, they're going to be sicker, and they're going to have to be paid a lot more. And so the thinking is that for Russia, they think without some sort of external assistance, some analysts put Russia's material and manpower recruitment, it has about 12 to 18 months left. But that could all change with North Korea joining the fight. Now, President Zelensky in his nightly address said, quote, "We are seeing an increasing alliance between Russia and regimes like North Korea. Quote, this is no longer about transferring weapons. It is actually about transferring people from North Korea to the occupying military forces." This, of course, aligns perfectly with a statement just a few days ago from the South Korean defense minister, who said that North Korea is likely deploying its soldiers to Ukraine to fight alongside Russian troops. And some North Korean soldiers allegedly died after Kiev's forces bombed a Russian training ground in Donetsk. Training ground, because again, Russia generally doesn't train its troops that close or within range of Ukrainian missile systems. Right? So again, what I think is there's a lot here that's pretty embarrassing for the West. And I'm going to talk about that. So here's what I think is so stinking embarrassing for the West is that the North Korean military, right? And is huge, guys. It's huge. I think it's the fourth or fifth largest by personnel in the world. Yeah, it's the fifth largest, 1.3 million active troops. All Korean men, North Korean men, age 17 to 30 are required to serve. And it's obvious why Kim Jong-un wants to do this. It's because he wants to get as many of his soldiers and his generals as possible to learn how to fight Western weapons and Western tactics. He knows that the South Koreans have a close partnership with the U.S. military. So going toe-to-toe with a U.S. military-trained force is going to provide invaluable combat experience for his troops. And it's going to also give him access to the weapon systems, right, through his partnership with Russia that he's going to need to pursue this fight. So it's a massive boon for him. And, the only people who are going to pay the price, of course, is the average Korean soldier who is already starving, uneducated, and is likely has very limited training in the kinds of fighting that are going to need to take place. Now, I sort of suspect the North Koreans are going to remedy that. They're going to take some of their better active battalions. I think it'll probably be battalions at first. Or possibly brigades. They're going to put them through a standard kind of Russian training cycle, where probably the same one as their contract soldiers, right? So they'll say, okay, we're going to have a translator here, but you're going to go through the same training pipeline as our contract soldiers, and then we're going to deploy you to the front. Now, the thing that bothers me about this is that, one of the themes of kind of this war, if you haven't taken it away already, is that this is a war between autocracies and democracies. And if you're someone like, you see Russia's friends and biggest supporters, it's China under Xi Jinping, who is functionally a dictator, right? Or a single party communist state. You have Iran, who is a religious theocracy, right? And then you have North Korea, who is a just plain old dyed-in-the-wool dictatorship. And when you have the largest dictatorships in the world working together, and then on the other side, you have Ukraine. And the war was in part fought because Ukraine was becoming a more democratic, more Western-oriented country. And so you have this democratic versus autocracy systems. Now, obviously, right, everybody's a little different. The Iranians kind of sort of have elections, but but all the candidates get pre-approved to make sure they're religious fundamentalists. And, Xi Jinping is technically elected but functionally, these are all autocracies. Very little possibility of meaningful leadership change, very little possibility of a change to the ruling party or person. In contrast, right, democracies have some level of turnover between competing visions of governing a country. Now, the problem is that one of the arguments that autocracies make is that they say, we are effective. We centralize control. We centralize the needs of what we want to do in order to achieve discrete objectives. Right? One person decides what we're going to do, and then we do it. In democracies, everybody gets a vote. You can't just send off weapons or troops, right? You have to put it to a vote to your Congress or your parliament, right? A bunch of special interests are going to lobby. Different states and governors are going to say, well, you can't deploy our National Guard. We need them for hurricane relief. Everybody's going to get a vote. Everybody's going to get a say. And it slows the process. And democracies say this makes the decision-making collective and more effective. We come to a better decision ultimately, having weighed in all the different consequences through this collective input. But autocracies say, well, we can just set an objective and we can execute on it. And here's the problem, is that only one state up until this point has officially committed its military to aid one side or another in this conflict. Only one side, and it is North Korea. And so North Korea, who has no democracy and therefore can kill soldiers en masse with no problem, is willing to do this. And the problem is that the West continues its policy of slow walking everything. Ukraine, if the West simply removed its barriers, its restrictions on weapon systems that it has now, right? Ukraine would have wiped the floor with Russia already, right? If they had ATACMS, HIMARS, cluster munitions, F-16s, if they had access to the right to strike in Russian territory, if they finally had all of those tools and removed all the restrictions they have today, if they had that in 2022, they wouldn't have just liberated Kherson and Kharkiv. They would have probably pushed the Russians back to the border. But the problem is the West keeps slow walking all of their help. And this is what drives people bananas, because when you slow walk it, particularly when you have an autocracy, they have time to adapt. They have time to change the way they fight around these new tools. But if you're confronted with all these tools at once, the other problem is that, again, money is good and aid is good, but when you have an entire country who's willing to back you up, an entire whole ass other country, the fifth largest military in the world, you need more than that, right? And this is, if you've ever studied the Spanish Civil War, you understand how this goes, right? When you have two sides competing with each other, and both of them have large countries supporting them, but one country's support is milquetoast and weak and mostly symbolic, that's not this. But if it's half measures, they're going to lose to the side that has a country supported in an all-in way. Again, Spanish Civil War, simple thing. You add the nationals, the fascists, right? The nacionales, the fascists, who were supported by 1930s Germany. But 1930s Germany was like, we will train you. Oh yeah, and we want to give our units combat experience. This story sound familiar? So we're going to have our airborne units. We're going to have our tank units. They're going to fight in your formations. We are going to refine our blitzkrieg tactics using your country as a test ground. Meanwhile, we had the Spanish Republicans, and they had symbolic help from Western countries, from other democracies. The other democracies said, we support you, we recognize you, the Republic of Spain, the legitimate government of Spain, and the Soviet Union of the 1930s, Stalin's Soviet Union. But Stalin, well, we sent him some advisors. He'd release a little gear. He'd release some stuff. But, the Soviet tanks, he wasn't going to release them. No Soviets were going to fight. Maybe we'll give him small arms, but none of the big stuff. We won't give him any aircraft. There were all these strings and conditions and caveats. And the side that won was not the side with more friends. It was the side with the friend who actually jumped in. It was the fascists. And so the fear I have is when I see stuff like this and it says that, listen, Russia doesn't need 1,000 milquetoast friends, which sometimes that's what it feels like Ukraine has. It needs a friend who's actually willing to put up or shut up. Now, it's easy for me to say, right? Because I say things like put up or shut up or get involved. But that would mean deaths, right? That would mean militaries would be pulling triggers into Russians, and it would mean KIA, right? And families would have to bury sons and daughters. And I don't wish that on anybody. But in some ways, the worst possible way to run this is to slow walk your aid so that you just lose slowly, right? And that's sort of the fear that I have when I see this stuff. Now, again, there's a lot we got to know about what North Korea is doing. But hopefully, my hope is that countries like South Korea, countries like the United States, we look and we say, okay, we were being so couched and caveated and deferent to Russia to avoid escalation, to avoid this spiraling. And we say, well, now you've spiraled it. You've chosen to escalate. You've chosen to involve a third party in this war. So now there is room in this war for more than one third party. That's how it is. And, that's a hope, but it would require a military and a commander-in-chief that is more willing to take risks than the person currently in the White House, or the team currently in the White House, let's be honest. And this isn't, you're like, oh, he's implying this candidate or that candidate. I don't think either candidate has the actual stomach to actually be like, hey, we have to confront this threat and mitigate it, right? What you should do, and I'll just add this here, what should happen is this. A more decisive president in the White House would pick up the phone and they'd say, hey, I need a direct line to Putin. And he would say, hey, if you were to involve a third party military in direct combat in this war, understand that other militaries would take it as authorization, as permissible to intervene directly. And just leave it at that. Just say, and the message will be clear, that if you want to bring in North Korean conscripts, that means that you're going to see F-35s, you're going to see F-22s, you're going to see cruise missiles. We're going to do everything we can to destroy every single Russian position in Ukraine. Full stop. Because you don't get, if you play stupid games, win stupid prizes. That's what a better, I think that would be a more decisive route the White House could take. Conflict of Nations is a free PvP multiplayer strategy game set in a modern global conflict. Choose your strategy and fight massive battles all over the world. For the next 30 days, Conflict of Nations is offering a massive sign-up bonus. Click the link in the description to get 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. Click the link in the description, choose your country, and fight your way to victory.